morning, everyone. Captain Sarabjot Anand. Great biography that was just read. So a bit about me in a nutshell. Born and raised in India, immigrated to Canada in 2004, graduated Royal Military College of Canada in 2015, computer science background, and I'm based out of Ottawa, working for the Air Force, using my computer science degree and helping develop new capabilities for the Air Force in my current role. So outside my primary and secondary duties, like it was mentioned, I'm helping DRDC, which is Defense Research and Development Canada, develop these gas mask extensions to accommodate turbans, hijabs, and beards. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on in my slide deck. So some of my layers, and I really want to talk about my layers here, is as stated, I'm an immigrant, right? I am a turban-wearing Sikh, a Sikh soldier, as you can see. I speak 5 languages. I was the first ever turbaned officer to graduate the Royal Military College of Canada since the college was founded in 1876. So that's like 10 years after Confederation. When Canada was founded, 10 years later, the institution was created. And in 2011, I joined. And in 2015, I was the first ever graduate in the history of the institution. So, and I'll talk about my diversity and inclusion journey and how my career path in the Canadian Armed Forces has shaped me into who I am today. So that's a bit about me in a nutshell. So let's quickly move over to the next slide. So before we start, let me kind of set the stage, share the intent of the presentation, right? So we all know April is now recognized as a Sikh Heritage Month. And the other presenters and the panelists here, they'll be sharing about important figures from our past, the rich Sikh history, but I kind of wanted to take a different approach and a different perspective to the conversation, right? I'll be focusing my presentation on, the martial nature of the Sikhs, that warrior culture that was mentioned earlier on, and then talk a bit about the Sikhs in the defense, and then talk about my diversity and inclusion journey, my personal journey when I first enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces. So going back more than 5 centuries ago, when Sikhism was founded as a religion, it was founded but forced by, it was founded on peace but forced by self-defense, resilience, and defiance, right? The reputation of Sikhs as warriors is well known throughout the world. So it was our Guru Har Gobind, who was the 6th Guru out of the 10 that were talked about. He started to militarize Sikhs, right? So they could, be prepared and be able to fight off or resist any oppression. And then fast forward a few years, the order of Khalsa was created, and it was initiated by Guru Gobind Singh, who was the last in line of the preceptors or the 10 gurus that the Sikh faith had. And the Guru transformed the faith to incorporate a military strain, formalizing the Sikhs into what we know as the Khalsa, or the fraternity of the pure. Fast forward a few years again, when India fell under the British Empire, and this was mentioned earlier on, the Sikhs quickly gained that reputation as one of the world's bravest armies, right? As part of the British Indian Army, just like Jasdeep mentioned. To the point where, and Jasdeep mentioned this, and it was great, and I want to echo it again, to the point where the first Prime Minister of this very nation, Sir John A. Macdonald, requested an army of Sikhs in that letter, right? It still amazes me how we're sitting here in Canada, right, participating in this wonderful virtual session, and the Prime Minister, the very Prime Minister of this very nation, requested an army of Sikhs back in 1867. It was amazing. And that kind of paved the path for us Sikh soldiers. Since then, our ancestors did a great job, built that reputation, and we can kind of feed off of that reputation and pave the path forward for the future generations. So Sikhs have that rich history of warrior culture and bravery. And of course, we fought with the British Empire during the World Wars. And it's important to know, Sikhs made up only 2% of total India's population back in the days. And the number is still trickling percentage-wise close to that. But yet, back in the World Wars, right? They comprised 22% of the British Indian Army during World War I. That's crazy. 2% of a nation's population, but comprising 22% of the British Indian Army. And that goes to show why we were known as the Lions of the Great War. It's our last name. The British Indian Army knew about the Sikhs, and they wanted the Sikhs to participate because inherently we had that warrior culture that we brought to the fight, and we were ready to fight. And I'll kind of transition over, Sikhs created this great reputation for themselves with the British Empire, but they didn't kind of stop there, right? So like Jasdeep mentioned, it's a little not necessarily known fact, but 10 Sikhs actually served in the Canadian Army back in the First World War. And the names were mentioned previously, but one of the key ones I do want to, not that others weren't important, they're all great, but one of the ones that's close to home, geographically at least, it's Private Buckham Singh, right? Like that Jasdeep mentioned. His grave is at Mount Hope Ceremony in Kitchener, Ontario. And he's the only known grave, or he has the only known grave of a Sikh soldier from World War I that's in Canada, right? On Canadian soil, and it's still there in Kitchener-Waterloo. So I actually go to visit that gravesite every Remembrance Day as part of, me paying my respects, because he was a pioneer in paving the path for me, for paving the path for Sikh soldiers. He was there as a Canadian soldier during World War I and got the opportunity to be buried on Canadian soil. That wasn't necessarily the case during the World Wars. So that's important to know, right? There we go. So next slide. So before I talk about moving on to this diversity and inclusion and my personal journey of being a Sikh officer in the Canadian Armed Forces, let me orient the stage again, and let me share my approach with you. So a bit of pretext, people often ask me, what makes me most proud of my Sikh identity? Of course, there's values and beliefs of the Sikh faith of equal importance, but I'll focus this conversation on the physical appearance, right? My turban is what makes me proud of my Sikh identity. So Sikhs regard their turbans as gifts given by their beloved gurus, and there's a deep personal meaning to this. So in the South Asian culture, a bit of background, wearing a turban typically indicated one's social status, right? So back in the day, the kings and the rulers, they once wore turbans. So the Sikh gurus, what they did was they adopted the turban in part to remind the Sikhs that humans are sovereign, they're royal, and ultimately equal, right? The intent of the turban partly was kill the social status, get rid of the rich and the poor, the average Joe Blow and the ruler and the king, and make everyone equal. We're all humans. We got the same skeleton. We're made out of the same, muscles, the biological material. Everything is the same. So we should all be treated equally. And that was the intention behind the turban. And that's what I'm so proud of. So when I first started the Royal Military College of Canada back in August 2011, I was distraught. My staff approached me and he said, we have no idea what you're going to be wearing as your headdress as part of the RMC dress uniforms. So although the Canadian Forces or Canadian Armed Forces at the time, they had dress regulations to incorporate turbans because, our ancestors have fought for different rights. So far, no one had fought the battle of RMC uniforms because no fault to the institution, there hadn't been a Sikh officer cadet to go through Royal Military College of Canada since it was founded. It just happened so I was the first one that joined and enrolled in 2011 since it was founded in 1876, and the first one to ever graduate 4 years later in 2015. So I kind of took this on as a challenge, a personal goal to ensure, future Sikh officers coming through the institution don't face the same hurdles I did. Kind of made it my mission to educate as many people as I could, do community outreach, raise awareness, and try my best to pave the path for future officer cadets and future soldiers of the Canadian Armed Forces. And this was the start to my diversity and inclusion journey. So here on the next slide, you'll see the dress regulations, right? Step one of my mission was to help make RMC more inclusive. And I want to note, we use the jargon of diversity and inclusion. A lot of the people know what diversity is, right? But people miss that inclusion piece. And that's what I'm really trying to hit home. They go hand in hand. Just because you have diversity, you haven't won the battle yet, right? You're missing that inclusion piece. And that was my driving motivation, is how do I make the institution more inclusive? So I, along with a few other Sikh officers that joined after I joined in RMC, we helped develop and implement this bilingual turban standard to make RMC more inclusive. And now it's formalized as the RMC dress regulations. So now, no matter when or where a Sikh officer joins in, whether you're going to RMC Kingston or its sister branch in Quebec, right? There is a turban standard as part of the dress regulations now. So people know, all communities, all officer cadets and naval cadets know this is what a turban looks like. If we have a Sikh soldier joining in, trying to become an officer or a ma'am in the Canadian Armed Forces, this is what they're going to be doing. So this is where that dress regulation piece came in. And I was able to succeed with my team of fellow Sikh soldiers to accomplish this goal before I graduated, paving the path for future officers. And then next came education, right? So education is key when raising awareness, right? The next challenge was, how do I raise awareness and educate others outside my immediate vicinity of RMC, right? We have this rich history of warriors, but the local population doesn't know or isn't aware, right? No fault to their own. Again, it's our duty as a community to raise awareness, right? Otherwise, people are busy with their lives. So for those of you in the National Capital Region, you probably are familiar that Ottawa hosts the Canada Army Run. I took that as an opportunity, go in the nation's capital, put on my full 50-pound kit with the military, and go for a run in the heart of downtown Ottawa, right? I wanted the message to get across that I look different, I may sound different, but I'm still a soldier, but I'm a Sikh soldier. I wear the same maple leaf proudly on my uniform, right? My mission is still to serve Canada and its interests. Another great example, like Jody mentioned, right? Her current core, or Wanda McDonald, a Sikh convert. She was a member of the Royal Canadian Navy back in 2014, and she fought hard to be able to wear a turban as part of her naval uniform. And now it's formalized again in the dress regulations for the Royal Canadian Navy as well, and the Canadian Forces dress instructions. So kudos to her for paving the path for us as well as a woman in the defense sector in Canada. Next goal in line for me was maximizing community outreach, right? We're blessed as a nation where we recently have had a great representation by Sikhs, at least in the political sphere, right? So we have the leader of the NDP party, Jagmeet Singh, on the right. We have the previous Minister of National Defense, Harjit Sajjan, Honorable Harjit Sajjan in the middle of the photo over there. But we were lacking that representation in the Canadian Armed Forces sphere. And that's what I wanted to tackle. So during my time at RMC, I led the military contingent at Remembrance Day ceremonies for Private Buckham Singh that I talked about, that known grave in Kitchener-Waterloo of the Sikh soldier. And that's me, photos in red, that's me during my time at RMC. And post-RMC, I kind of continued on that practice. But this time became the aide-de-camp to the previous Minister of National Defense, Honorable Harjit Sajjan. Right, that was the focus of my community outreach. And then representation, right? Another big goal for diversity and inclusion journey is representation. You'll notice the different turbans with different uniforms, and that was part of the turban standard we created, right? So photo on the left where other cadets would wear a white pith helmet with golden spikes on top, the Sikh cadets would now wear a white turban with a golden ribbon, so that we are, fitting into the existing institutional rules. They just didn't accommodate or include turbans, and we included that to make the institution more inclusive. And I kind of climbed up the ranks and became a squadron leader, one of the top positions an officer cadet can hold during their tenure at RMC. So I made it my mission to excel within this institution and become a squadron leader, because in order for diversity and inclusion to be successful, you need that representation on top, right? This drives that motivation to the ones that are newly joining in or starting their professional journey, that they can look different, they can sound different, but aspire to be at the top one day. And that's why that visible minority representation is needed at the top. And just closing off quickly, because I know the timing is coming to an end, is, it's mentioned the Sikh way of life is, it's simple. Work hard to earn an honest living, share what you have, and remember God. Our gurus taught us to be fair and do community service and share what you have. So now with the Canadian Armed Forces, I get to embrace that diversity we have within our organization. I get to welcome and learn other soldiers, their backgrounds, their races, and religions. And having been deployed to Romania with the Royal Canadian Air Force as part of Op REASSURANCE, that was a dream come true, because I could truly practice the Sikh concept of duty before self by serving overseas. And then we sponsored a orphanage locally in Romania to kind of do that community outreach and community seva, and helping improve their quality of life. But the deployment brought questions for us, and last slide that I want to touch on is, in order to deploy, you need to pass these pre-deployment checklists, and all Sikhs currently fail this check, which is the gas mask test. So I'll give you an example. So when we deploy overseas, if the enemy is going to use the gas or chemical weapons against us, currently what's going to happen is the gas is going to leak within our gas mask because we don't have a proper seal because of the beards, and we're going to be deemed useless. So I was stuck in this battle of, do I sacrifice my beard and religious beliefs in order to deploy, or do I die overseas if the enemy uses a chemical weapon just because I didn't have the proper equipment to protect me? Luckily for us, the DRDC, the defense scientists, took on the challenge, and the scientists are trialing this gas mask extension to accommodate facial hair. And I've been part of this project, and I wanted to share that, the institution itself is doing the right things and moving in the right direction as the Canadian Armed Forces on their journey of diversity and inclusion. They, although we're short in numbers, 50 to 66 turban-wearing Sikhs with beards in the Canadian Armed Forces, they're trying to be more inclusive to accommodate turbans, beards, and hijabs. And I'll take questions in the end. I think my time has come. Thanks a lot for your time and opportunity, guys. Appreciate it.